Miles, who will be doing a dramatic presentation on Medgar Evers. But this is the first annual Black History Makers program, which is celebrating the life and legacy of Medgar Wiley Evers. As we go into this 50th year commemorating the assassination of Medgar Evers, be mindful of whose shoulders you are standing on. We have a number of heroes and sheroes who are both sung and unsung, who paved the way and made many great sacrifices for us to be where we are today. But we will have first greetings from the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, Dr. Lawrence Potter Jr., and also have greetings from the Department of History, Assistant Professor Dr. Rico Chapman.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Chamberlain, thank you for the invitation. And it is always a pleasure to welcome you to the College of Culture, as we like to call ourselves at Jackson State University. It is my pleasure to extend greetings on behalf of Jackson State's College of Liberal Arts and the entire university administration. I would like to take a moment to thank the Fannie Lou Hamer National Institute on Citizenship and Democracy, the Kofo Civil Rights Education Center, and the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University for their shared purpose in organizing a series of programs throughout Black History Month. Today, I thank the Kofo Civil Rights Education Center and the Department of History and Philosophy for their forward-thinking leadership in honoring the 50th anniversary of Medgar Wiley Evers' assassination and the celebration of his life and legacy. Visionary leadership is predicated on a leap of faith and a labor of love. Leadership is fundamental because there can be no significant social movement without visionary and analytical leadership by people of courage and integrity. We are not talking about one person, we are talking about a collective conscience. It is a deeply democratic ideal that says that ordinary people ought to be able to lead, that the people ought to be able to participate in the decision-making process of the institutions that guide and regulate their lives. When you look at the world through the lens of the cross, you have to be willing to pick up your own cross. Every cross leaves its marks, wounds, and scars. In the end, you may have to die on that cross. Therefore, we need leaders who dare to have this kind of cross-centeredness. And 50 years ago, we had such a leader in Jackson, Mississippi, in a man named Medgar Wiley Evers. To be a great leader, you must be habitually and visionary on and focused on greatness. Towering Black leaders like Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Martin Luther King, Ella Baker, and Fannie Lou Hamer had a tremendous sense of mission. They were rooted in courage and a profound commitment to love, to serve, and to lead Black people. These legends also had a deep sense of history. They understood that they were part of a tradition. They found the very meaning of life in giving to others. To them, the present was history in the making. It wasn't something located in a museum. History was a vital, vibrant process that they believed they could help write. Leading Blacks versus Black leaders are two different species identified by Dr. Julia Hare. Leading Black faces in high places are comforting representatives for a white audience. For the most part, they have been trying to speak to and soothe white fears, insecurities, and anxieties. Black leaders are those who love Black people enough to tell them the truth, respect them enough to believe they can wrestle with the truth, and are willing to sacrifice enough to pay some serious costs. Leading Blacks do not necessarily want to take such risk and are always willing to bear those costs. They are content to sit in those high places as representatives of great progress, part of a more color glass menagerie in America. Today, we honor and celebrate Black leaders who are history makers. Enjoy this program and welcome to the College of Culture.
Greetings. I really just want to say what he said, but he always make it hard for me, Dean Potter. But I do bring you greetings on behalf of the the Department of History and Philosophy. And I just want to thank COFO and, of course, our administration, the Barts, the dean, and the staff. I mean, you have put on a great program. It started last night. We had a very, very vibrant discussion with Dr. Michael Williams and Ms. Precious Vines. It was absolutely phenomenal. So we are now embarking on the 50th year anniversary of his assassination, but we don't want to celebrate his assassination. We're actually here to celebrate his life. So don't think about the assassination, think about Medgar Evers' life, as Dr. Williams told us last night. And that was 37 short years, but he lived them to the fullest. He gave his people, our people, the world, his best. And he left a wife, children. Actually, he was around my age. So if you think about that, you think about a young man giving his all to a movement, to a cause that he himself would actually foresee. He would foresee his untimely death. And it gets kind of emotional, as Dr. Williams said, because you're involved in researching these great heroes and sheroes that paved the way. And we see that oftentimes their lives end up tragically, bloodshed, disrupted families. So we are here to celebrate Dr. Michael Williams' book, his phenomenal authoritative study on Medgar Evers. We'll celebrate that and also honor Medgar Evers' life, his history, and the struggle. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Chapman just made reference to Dr. Williams' book, Medgar Evers, Mississippi Martyr. So for those of you who stick around to the end of this program, we will also be doing a book giveaway for some special attendee here today. But it now gives me pleasure to introduce the man of the hour. I've known Dr. Michael Williams for quite some time now, and I'm going to make this extremely personal, and I told him that it would be heartfelt. I met Dr. Williams when I was a graduate student at the University of Mississippi. We went through both the master's program and the PhD program together. I don't know what classes we didn't take together. We studied for our comprehensive exams together. We passed those exams together. And once Dr. Williams finished up, I continued to watch him in awe and be inspired by the great things he went on to do as an assistant professor at Mississippi State University in both history and African American studies. But Dr. Williams grew up in the community of Etta, right outside of Oxford, Mississippi. And he has a wonderful family who I got a chance to meet while we were at Ole Miss together. And his sister is represented here today for the entire family. They were homeschooled, and of course their parents did an absolutely wonderful job with them. Dr. Williams received both his master's and his PhD from the University of Mississippi. And as I mentioned, he is now the assistant professor in both history and African American studies at Mississippi State University, and the author of the definitive biography on Medgar Evers' life, Medgar Evers, Mississippi Martyr. We are extremely fortunate, Jackson State University family, local community members, and others from across the state who are here today, to have a dynamic speaker before us, to have a devoted scholar, but also have my dear friend bring you today's keynote address. So please join me in welcoming to the podium Dr. Michael Benson Williams.
I'd like to start by first saying good morning to each and every one of you. Good morning. I'd like to start by saying also that it is very much a pleasure and an honor to be here. And I really want to thank you all for coming out and taking the time to hear me talk about an individual that has consumed, for the most part, the last 10 years of my life. And in many ways, continues to do so. It's indeed an honor and a privilege to participate on a program such as this. Now, I tend to get very, very emotional. But there are certain things that I have to do before I begin any kind of presentation. Because when I don't do those things, things kind of go a little bit left. So I don't want that to happen here at Jackson State. So first and foremost, I have to give honor and respect to God, the Father and Mother of us all. To all of my ancestors and all of those individuals who worked so hard to make this world a much better place than the one in which they found it, I offer both my admiration and promise of emulation. In their absence, I also have to give honor and respect to my mother and father. And as always, I give my undying love and devotion to my 2 daughters. And finally, I have to also thank Dr. Daphne Chamberlain, the historic and also important Kofo Center, the Department of History and Philosophy, and Jackson State as an institution for allowing me to speak here this morning. So thank you for that. Now, for those of you all who know me, I tend to get pretty excited. Now, I'm going to try to contain some of that this morning because we're on a schedule, so I'm going to try to do my best to do that. But I'm here to talk about an individual, and in many ways, the life and legacy of Medgar Evers. And whenever you have the opportunity to talk about an individual of that caliber, it is always something to be so very excited about, particularly when you're talking in the presence of so many young people. So as I begin, as we come upon all of the celebrations surrounding the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Medgar Evers, it becomes so very important to appreciate his life and legacy. And through that appreciation, to understand and accept our own personal responsibility to carry on that selfless dedication that he demonstrated in regards to our own individual moral obligations to challenge inequality wherever we find it, no matter its physical, social, or political location. No matter whether it's easy or whether it's individually disadvantageous for us to do so, because that's what Medgar Evers did, and that's what he preached that we must do. This morning I want to briefly speak to you about the activism of Medgar Evers, the depth of his dedication to obtaining full citizenship rights for African Americans, and most importantly, his belief in young people. Now, I chose the title of this talk that you see here because I believe it truly encapsulates who Evers was, and it demonstrates the fortitude and steel determination he exhibited when it came to fighting for full citizenship for African Americans here in the state of Mississippi, but the nation as a whole. We cannot geographically pigeonhole him to this spot. He was much bigger than that. This was an individual for which failure was not an option, for the stakes were far too high, and the upcoming generations much too valuable to lose. His goals, as ours should be, was always to develop leadership qualities in young people so that they would always be ready whenever the opportunities for leadership presented themselves. But more importantly, that they would be prepared to present and discover and bring about such opportunities. Yet to fully appreciate the man Evers became, it is imperative that we fully understand the environment in which he labored. And at this point, I want to actually read a poem by Langston Hughes, because this demonstrates how individuals saw Mississippi from the outside. And it begins. Oh, what sorrow, oh, what pity, oh, what pain that tears and blood should mix like rain, and terror come again to Mississippi. Come again? Where's terror been? On vacation? Up north? In some other section of the nation lying low, unpublicized, masked with only jaundiced eyes showing through the mask? Oh, what sorrow, pity, pain that tears and blood should mix like rain in Mississippi, and terror, fetid hot, yet clammy cold, remain. This was the world that Medgar Evers lived and operated in. The violence and carnage that Hughes saw in 1955 would again be displayed during the early morning hours of June 12, 1963. Around 12:20 a.m., NAACP Field Secretary Medgar Evers pulled his Oldsmobile up into his yard as he had done countless times before. His wife, Merle Evers, had allowed the children to wait up for him. This is what he's coming home to. This right here is the foundation of his activism, but his love and devotion for his familiar nucleus was not confined to that house on Guyan Street. but rather spilled out to encompass the lives and well-being of all the individuals he knew and all those individuals he would never know. Why do I live in Mississippi? He asked and answered in 1958. I live here to better it for my wife and kids, and for all the wives and all the kids who expect and deserve something better than they are getting from life. This was the basis of what he was so willing to sacrifice for. This was the type of man and husband and father that headed home that fateful night on June 12th. Upon getting into his car, Medgar Evers, at the age of 37, was shot in the back with a high-powered rifle by white supremacist Byron Della Beckwith. Loaded into his neighbor's Houston Wells station wagon, Evers continued to struggle, yelling for those around him on the way to the hospital to first sit me up, and then his final words, turn me loose. He died moments later. Yet who was this man who had spent so much of his life and who had gone down in the presence of his family, and yet at the same time summed up in his last words what his entire life had been about? Those who upheld inequality in Mississippi knew full well for Evers what those final words had truly meant. Yet to fully understand the man that Evers became and why individuals felt the need to kill him, it is imperative that we also understand the events that molded him into that 37-year-old. And for that, it is important that we understand the significant role that his mother and father played in his overall development. For the young people here today, also have influential people in your lives if you choose to recognize them as such. Medgar Evers was born on July 2nd, 1925 to James and Jessie Evers. In addition to Medgar, the Evers had 6 other children between them and lived in a quiet area of Newton County, Mississippi. His parents would be instrumental in formulating his ideas regarding manhood, familial responsibility, self-worth, racial pride, and the true meaning of full citizenship. We're going to have to ask ourselves what these words really mean and what our responsibilities are for bringing them about. 3 key events, however, would be instrumental in defining his early social development, and each spoke to the problems associated with meekness and a lack of community unity and organization. The lynching of a family friend during his childhood brought the intensity of that oppression to bear. And it had a profound impact upon the way Evers viewed African Americans' current positions in society, and most importantly, what their responsibilities to challenging that inequality was. And what happened was this was an individual, and for whatever reason, whether he had insulted anyone as they put out there, that a mob actually grabbed this individual, paraded him through town, carried him down to the fairgrounds in Decatur, and lynched him there. This was the individual that Evers knew. He played with his children. Regarding the murder, Evers recalled, quote, nothing was said in public. No sermons in church, no news, no protests. It was as though this man just dissolved, except for the bloody clothes, end quote. For Evers, this particular lynching brought to bear the absolute helplessness of the African American community when people chose not to resist barbarism and inequality. He never forgot that. In a later interview in 1958, Evers noted, quote, everybody knew in town, but never a word in public. They left those clothes on a fence for about a year. Every Negro in town was supposed to get the message from those clothes. And I can see those clothes now in my mind's eye, end quote. That was in 1958 when he gave that interview. That happened when he was a child. This was something that he never forgot. He placed his childhood incident of brutality into a mental file, one that grew over the course of his lifetime. His father, James Evers, however, believed in hard work. He led by example and he refused to cower in the face of perceived white supremacy. And he challenged any attempt to cheat him or to intimidate his family. As children, Medgar and his older brother Charles often witnessed demonstrations of their father's bravado. But a particular incident really changed their ideas of what it really meant to be a man in Mississippi. In this particular instance, both boys accompanied their father to the local commissary to pay the balance of the family's bill. Now, discussions with white commissary manager Jimmy Bower actually escalated into a heated discussion because Bower was saying that his father owed actually more than he did. That discussion got so heated that at one point, James Evers takes a Coca-Cola bottle and he breaks it. And he holds that glass part in his hands and he threatens to kill Bower if he goes to the part of the counter where everybody knows he keeps a gun. As he is his son kindly bagged out, he pays Boulware on the way out, but he only pays him that which he knows he owes him. Now, can you imagine what that meant for two young boys to see their father in that kind of light? In 1943, this becomes particularly important. But these are words that James Evers had for his sons that particular day, and it was something that stuck with Evers throughout his lifetime. First and foremost, he says, don't ever let anybody beat you. Anyone ever kicks you, you kick the hell out of him. That was the message that his father gave his two boys that day. And then finally, if you're scared, you can't do nothing. Show a coward some nerve, and you can back them down. These were the words that Evers lived by. In 1943, Evers left high school early and joined the United States Army, where he served from October 7, 1943 to April 16, 1946. Now, for Medgar, the military provided respite from the dehumanizing actions that whites practiced against blacks in Decatur. Prior to enlistment, he had wondered just how long he could take living in Mississippi under a system of segregation and degradation. As a black male, he admitted that it had pained him to, quote, watch the Saturday night sport of white men trying to run down a Negro with their car, or white gangs coming through town to beat up a Negro, end quote. Evers returned from the military a decorated soldier with 2 combat stars, the Good Conduct Medal, and a record of notable military service. He also returned much less tolerant of the liberties that whites had taken in denying Negroes the right to vote in Decatur or any place else. On July 2, 1946, Medgar, his brother Charles, and 4 others decided that they would go to Decatur and actually vote. And when they got there, they met a white mob of armed individuals just as determined to prevent them from voting as they were to vote. And Evers remembered this, and he recalls. The 6 of us gathered at my house, and we walked to the polls. I'll never forget it. Now, the Negro was on the streets, and when we got to the courthouse, the clerk said he wanted to talk with us. When we got into his office, some 15 or 20 armed white men surged in behind us. Men I had grown up with, had played with. We split up and went home. Around town, Negroes said we had been whipped, beaten up, and ran out of town. Well, in a way, we were whipped, I guess. But I made up my mind then that it would not be like that again, at least not for me, end quote. Although denied the opportunity to vote, the stand Evers took that day fueled his desire for social equality, and that passion stayed with him long after he left Decatur. In the fall of 1946, Evers enrolled in the high school program at Alcorn Agricultural and Mechanical College. He completed the requirements for the high school diploma and enrolled as a freshman majoring in business administration during the 1948 fall term. And this is a picture of the Alcorn faculty at that time. Now, what you see right here with these individuals is that it doesn't look like they're going to be playing with you when it comes time to getting your lesson out. And that's something that Evers found very, very quickly. As a student, however, Evers believed in application rather than theorization. And he applied this belief to everything that he did, particularly with the academics that he pursued. As a consequence, he insisted that teachers apply the full weight of the entire academic system to the task of solving the problems of the community, rather than merely using it to disseminate information. Since childhood, Evers had a penchant for looking towards the future and focusing on its possibilities. He viewed the present as a motivator for making one's vision of the future a reality. He did not consider the present to be a moment in time and space deserving of contempt. He graduated in 1952 with a degree in business administration, and then he headed to Mound Bayou, Mississippi, where he sold insurance for Magnolia Mutual Life Insurance. And when we talk about Mound Bayou, we're talking about the Delta area, we're talking about this football-shaped situation here. Throughout the Delta, Evers found that the sharecropping system, through economic exploitation and physical violence, victimized and shackled African Americans to the land in many ways that resembled chattel slavery. These are the things that he sees in the Delta. These are the images. And as you say, he notes, any man with an ounce of pride who works in the Delta soon wants to do something. And as he's going through, he sees these tragic issues of poverty and deprivation. Images such as this are things that bother him on a day-to-day basis, and they help motivate and push him forward. Every time I think about my kids and their innocence, he notes in 1958, I wonder how whites can make the youngsters suffer so. I guess that thought keeps me in NAACP work. These were the visions, thoughts, and ideas that haunted him daily, and they kept him motivated. Yet arguably the most influential event that helped solidify Everest's commitment to the movement in Mississippi occurred on the night that his father passed away. The circumstances surrounding the death of his father left a lasting impression, as he recalls. I was in the basement of the hospital at Union, Mississippi. That's where Negro patients stayed. At my dad's bedside. He had had a hemorrhage and was sinking fast. I heard a rising murmur of voices, a rushing of feet, and there was an ugly crowd outside the building. A nurse called me upstairs and asked me to help. There was a Negro with his leg bandaged. He had been in a fracas with a policeman. Someone had shot him in the leg. The whites were like madmen, muttering among themselves about the nigger, peeping in the windows to see if they could spot him. My dad died a short time later, and outside these whites were demonstrating like animals. I've never forgotten that either. A Negro cannot live here or die here in peace as long as things remain as they are. Evers connected this event to that experienced by young people suffering the same and worse, as parents and relatives were lynched, beaten, and sometimes individuals left home early in the morning and they never returned. He internalized a responsibility to young people and believed that they had a responsibility to themselves and that only effective leadership could fully develop. See, for Evers, there was a connection between the old leaders and those who were coming up after them. In December 1954, the NAACP officially named Evers as its Mississippi Field Secretary. As such, he was responsible for investigating brutalities wherever they occurred, for increasing NAACP memberships, building NAACP chapters, and to exposing the social political brutalities happening in Mississippi to the nation at large. Yet it would be his investigations of the brutal murders, particularly in 1955, that seemed to take a toll. May 7, 1955, Reverend George Lee in Belzoni, Mississippi was shotgunned to death because of his voter activist work. August 13, 1955, Mr. Lamar Smith, Brookhaven, gunned down because of his voter activist work. August 28, 14-year-old Emmett Lewis Till, kidnapped and lynched brutally just for being a black person in Mississippi. And those brutal pictures that Jet magazine distributed horrified and shocked the nation. On December 3rd, Evers also investigated the brutal murder of gas station attendant Clinton Melton, who was shotgunned to death for filling up a patron's car, who later came back and said he only wanted $2 worth. Melton, of course, left a wife and 4 small children, ages 5, 3, 2 months, and 5 months old. Evers noted these individuals, quote, were left fatherless by this fiendish killing. The experience of this investigation shall be of long memory, end quote. Imagine carrying the weight of these kinds of images, memories, and the pain of them continuously replicated with new faces and unimagined horrors. During the latter part of the 1950s, Evers heightened his activist role in response to white communities' increasingly violent reactions to African Americans' demands for social and political change. In a personal statement, Evers recounted the events of March 11, 1958. Here, Evers actually purchases a bus ticket from Trailways. And when he gets on the bus, he actually goes to the front of the bus. The bus driver, G.B. Shelton, says, well, look, you can't sit here. You know the rules and regulations where black people are supposed to sit. Evers refuses to move. The bus driver stops the bus. He gets off. The police come on. They get Evers. They take him off the bus. They ask him some specific questions. Particularly, do you really know what you're doing? Evers says yes. They allow him to get back on the bus. He goes right back to the front and sits down. Bus takes off. A cab driver stops the bus, gets on. He goes to Evers, and he starts beating him in the face as hard as he can. Evers does not fight back. Eventually, he gets off the bus, and Evers continues on to Jackson, man in the front seat. This is in 1958, when the law is very clear where African Americans are supposed to sit. If you don't think this is a dangerous endeavor, look what happened in 1961, when the law had changed to allow black people to sit where they need to sit. This is 1958 where Evers is doing this. This bus incident indicated Evers' move toward more direct challenges to inequality. He further emphasized this shift a few months later when he reminded an audience that in the fight for civil rights, that neither he nor Negroes as a collective could afford to, quote, cease to press forward relentlessly until every vestige of segregation and discrimination in America becomes annihilated, end quote. Above all, Evers made sure that he was available to help young people who were accosted because of their civil rights activities, and he stood with them against the agents of oppression. Both he and the NAACP have successfully got student Amos Brown readmitted in September of 1958 to the Jackson Public Schools, and Evers acknowledged that, quote, there seems to be a well-planned program to intimidate members of our youth movement in Mississippi. He proudly pointed out, however, that there was one interesting thing about these acts of intimidation. Instead of frightening the youth are actually becoming more determined in their efforts than ever before. We have even been approached by some who are ready to start the integration battle for the public schools, end quote. These young people excited him. And thus, whenever we speak the name Medgar Evers, we have to understand that young people was a very serious, fundamental part of his overall plans. Young people had something for Evers, and he drove them. And that's important that you all are sitting here today. In a report to NAACP Secretary Ruby Hurley on April 13, 1960, Evers discussed the origins of a boycott that crippled stores along Capitol Street. Evers recalled that after a number of encouraging meetings with civic leaders, students, clergy, and other business people, the group decided that a boycott would be an effective strategy, and they scheduled it for April 10th. With J.P. Campbell College as its base of operations, on April 3rd, more than 350 students, just like yourselves, actually fanned out all over Jackson, going to black homes and encouraged them to participate in the boycott. And this is something that Evers couldn't get past because of that kind of dedication. By April 7th, nearly 200 male students from the three colleges, and that's Jackson State, Campbell College, and Tougaloo, passed out some 10,000 handbills to the 61,000 Negro citizens, urging them to participate in the boycott. This kind of support resulted from the many talks and recruitment efforts that Evers conducted in the local colleges, churches, and organizations, and community centers, and students trusted what they told him. Now this is going to be important because I want you all to look at this as a means of getting an idea of Evers and what he's talking about. Particularly pay attention to the young people. And this is him talking about the boycott. Doesn't seem to be working. Well, don't worry about it. Yeah, it's actually plugged in back here, but it's not. It's not going. So these kind of glitches happen. So. But anyway, basically what he was telling them is telling them to support the boycott. Don't have these issues in terms of backing down. But I want you to kind of get a sense of who he was and what those individuals were like. But we'll actually continue. For Medgar Evers, however, the younger generations were the most important element for combating the undesirable growth of racism. For out of the youth organizations, he argued, must continue to come the leaders in the future fight. For they have a definite responsibility to help, because much of what we are arguing and struggling for now will benefit them directly 10 years from now, will open up opportunities that were not open when I came along. By 1960, young people were picking up the mantle of responsibility in large numbers, regardless of the consequences, with the expectations that Medgar Evers would be there to help and advise them if need be. Now quickly, case in point, and this is going to be key, because young people actually trusted what he said. Individual by the name of Johnny Frazier, a young person, had actually been beaten by police and jailed in Winona, Mississippi in 1960. The first person he called was Medgar Evers to come to Winona and get him out. This happened on the weekend, so Evers couldn't quite go get him then. But on Monday morning, both he and youth member by the name, this is going to be key, Meredith C. Andy Jr., which would later be a part of the Tougaloo 9 less than a year later, went to Winona to get him out. When they get there, they find out that he has a trial date that morning, even though he doesn't have a lawyer. So he has to represent himself. So Evers goes to the courthouse. He's segregated in there, in the kind of segregated section. But the sheriff asks Frazier, do you want to talk to anybody? Frazier says yes. He says, who do you want to talk to? He says, Mr. Evers. Evers then comes down to the floor of the courthouse, advises him. He's able to get Frazier released with the instruction that both of them have to get out of town immediately. These are the things that Evers are involved in. This was the kind of relationship he had manufactured with the youth in that particular area. And that connection was never more evident than what happened on March 27, 1961. Now, on March 27, 9 students from Tougaloo College proceeded to the Jackson Public Library, entered the white facility, pulled books, sat down, and began to read. Of course, they were arrested. Evers knew of the impending read-in. Beforehand, he had met regularly with the students and devised plans and strategies. The individuals eventually, of course, released, but Evers was always aware of the need to inspire young people and to legitimize the significance of their contributions. Evers contacted NAACP Executive Secretary Roy Wilkins regarding the Tougaloo 9, acknowledging that it would be an inspirational gesture for these 9 young people if we could arrange to have them attend our national convention in Philadelphia on July 10th through the 16th. And the NAACP does. It pays for them to go. Right? And Evers often, at this point, also gives money to some of those students who are leaving at that point, until their vouchers would arrive. Unfortunately, one of those individuals, it always bothered him that he was never able to pay Evers back. Now, during the final 2 months of his life, the things Evers did not like about Mississippi were more pronounced, as was his strategies to defeat them. During May and June of 1963, Evers' fight for full citizenship rights intensified in conjunction with applied direct action tactics by area youth that brought Jackson, Mississippi national attention and also heightened civil rights struggle and agitation throughout the state. Jackson Mayor Allen C. Thompson had, through the media, newspapers, and organized rallies, sought to stifle the effectiveness of the civil rights movement in Jackson at every turn. A movement that by 1963 were actually instituting effective boycotts. Thompson argued throughout his speech that what made Jackson such a great city was its beautiful facilities, libraries, parks, and an absence of slums that were prevalent, he remarked, in these larger urban areas. He cautioned the Negro citizens, and that's what he called them, to realize, quote, the good they were afforded by living in a city where you are treated, no matter what anybody else tells you, with dignity, courtesy, and respect, end quote. His optimism, however, failed to acknowledge the fact that African Americans suffered from extreme levels of violence, social inequality, and the ever-intimidating tactics of the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission, the White Citizens Council, and the Ku Klux Klan. On May 20, 1963, however, Evers appeared on television sets across Jackson and countered Thompson's rosy outlook on race relations. He maintained from the beginning to end that what the Negro sees around him and what his reality is 2 totally different things. He cautioned the conservative leadership that, 1, the world has moved forward in the past 20 years. This is Evers on television. Racial concepts have changed. Many southern communities have changed. Tonight, the Negro plantation worker in the Delta knows from his radio and television what happened today all over the world. He knows what black people are doing, and he knows what white people are doing. He can see on the 6 o'clock news screen the picture of a 3 o'clock bite by a police dog. He knows about the new free nations in Africa, and knows that a Congo native can be a locomotive engineer, but in Jackson he cannot even drive a garbage truck. He sees black prime ministers and ambassadors, financiers, and technicians. Then he looks around his home community, and what does he see? To quote our mayor in this progressive, beautiful, friendly, prosperous city with an exciting future, he sees a city where Negro citizens are refused admittance to the city auditorium and the Coliseum. His children refuse a ticket to a good movie in a downtown theater. His wife and children refuse service at a lunch counter in a downtown store where they're trading. Students refuse the use of the main public libraries, parks, playgrounds, and other tax-supported recreational facilities. Evers, in one brief moment, had effectively placed Jackson within the overall movement for equality by linking Mississippi residents to the national and international struggle for citizenship and social political equality. After Evers' speech, African Americans were more determined than ever to press forward. Yet the televised rebuttal to Mayor Thompson and the success and publicity of the boycotts and Evers' connection to it increased his vulnerability. Whites heard and saw him speaking publicly about his goals, strategies, justifications, and the resolve that boycotting had toward creating meaningful social and political change. This, of course, made it all the more difficult to protect him. And we'll see here on June 1st, Evers is engaged in direct action activity outside of Woolworth, which he's arrested. This is Mayor Thompson, of course, and his police force. After his assassination, we can't forget that this is a family issue. These, of course, his children and wife who are there at that point. This, of course, is the funeral, of course, and you see how individuals are very much taken with that. And it'd be over 4,000 individuals who would actually come out and be a part of that funeral. And it's something that actually galvanizes the movement in Mississippi at that point. So as I conclude, Everest's continuous search for the best ways, means, and strategies to help change society for the better remains one of the many lessons that he taught. These characteristics also help define his meaning to the Black freedom movement in Mississippi and the need for continued struggle and the significance of his martyrdom. He viewed the struggle for civil rights not as a one-dimensional entity, but a multi-sided quandary whose solution depended upon multiple strategies. But the most important strategy lay in the hearts and minds of those who would carry the torch toward future generations. And the questions that future generations would inevitably ask of their own participation in the struggle for your time and place. And for Everest, in the final analysis, he notes, but let it not be said in the final analysis when history will only record these glorious moments, and when your grandchildren will inevitably ask, Granddad, what role did you play in helping to make us free men and free women? Did you actively participate in the struggle, or was your support only a moral one? Certainly each person here, and man in particular, should be in a position to say, I was active in the struggle from all phases for your unrestricted privileges as an American. Not as a Mississippian, or Alabamian, or Georgian, but American. And for us, that is his ultimate legacy. That at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, that you did your very best to leave your mark on this world, and that you changed it in a way that others would benefit from dramatically. That is the legacy of Medgar Evers. And I thank you for your time.
We can do a better job of this round of applause for Dr. Williams. To let students who are changing classes just for a moment, and then we will hear from Professor Johannes Miles, assistant professor in both the Department of not mass communication, but speech and theater. Miss Rena, would you like to come down, please? Rena Evers Everett, who served as the convocation speaker for Jackson State University and also the daughter of Medgar Evers, has joined us for this session this morning. So please welcome her as she comes down. Professor Miles. Now we will have Professor Johannes Miles.
Down. Captain had me scouting for these guys. Of course, for the life of me, I couldn't understand why they were screaming, seeing how we were shooting at them and they at us. So I'm ahead scouting for these guys when all of a sudden I found myself caught smack dead in the middle of this explosion. It must have been a booby trap or something, because all around me was fire. I kind of felt like I was on fire. But then something said to me, hey, Evers, if you're on fire, how come you don't feel anything? And that's when I put two and two together and realized I didn't feel a whole lot of pain because I had already died and come back to life. No. I just picked myself up. I walked right out of the explosion. I'm fully expecting to see white clouds, Jesus, maybe even my mama. And there was the fellas. They were standing off in the distance, and I'm like, hey, we got him! We got him! But they stared at me like I'm some type of ghost. So I started staring back at them. Only what I saw, I can't quite explain. I swear, as we all were wearing green and holding our guns, I saw a piece of their future on their faces. And I told them, hey, fellas, listen, hey, guys, look, I'm here, man. I'm in the flesh. I'm in the flesh. Maybe I must have died and I came back to life. But they're staring at me. Y'all don't understand. I can't describe what I saw. I saw how JF, I saw how he was going to go back to Chicago and get shot down by the police. I saw how Hubert was going to start beating up on his old lady, but I couldn't understand because all he talked about in the war was how much he loved her. I saw brutality of a whole race. I saw inequalities. I saw... Baby, God, I know it was God. He spoke to me. He said, Evers, these color boys, they're not going to be the same after this war. They're going to have all kinds of pain on their face. So I guess since Jesus goes around healing all the sick people, I guess I'm supposed to go back and heal all these colored people from this war that's going to be happening and pain on their face. Hey, God! Okay, tell me what I'm going to say. What I'm going to say to them. I'm going to speak to them. What did you put in me that'll make me move? And he said, hey, Evers, you're going to need perseverance. You're going to need some commitment, some passion. I want you to stand, even if you're the only one standing. I want you to believe in what you feel and feel what you believe. What was that? I said I want you to believe in what you feel and feel what you believe. Stand, Evers, as a civil rights activist. Okay, God, okay. Stand at the voter's registration. Okay. Stand at boycotts at all businesses and companies that practice discrimination. Okay, God. I want you to stand, Evers. Stand. They can kill a man, but they can't kill his stand.
And that was Jackson State's own Professor Johannes Miles. Now we will open the floor up for questions and answers. So if you have questions, Dr. Williams is here, and we will also do the book giveaway, so you'll have an opportunity to get an autographed copy of Medgar Evers, Mississippi Martyr. So Dr. Williams. Questions?
Any questions?
Could you be specific when you describe the young people that Medgar Evers work with, the age groups of the young people that he worked with and was so inspired by?
Okay. Yeah, well, he worked with a lot of students that were in youth chapters of the NAACP. Those individuals sometimes were 13, 14 years old, sometimes a little younger. A lot of students that were 15, 16. What's important too, because we have such young people here, is that he actually went to court for 2 individuals who had been given a year probation by the judge for simply participating in NAACP activities. And so he actually went to them. They were given a year's probation, but they also had to write a term paper about juvenile delinquency as a means of lessening the curfew times that he had gave them, from 6 months to maybe 3. They also could not attend any kind of protest organizations, NAACP, SNCC, SCLC, or anything. And those individuals were 13 years old and 14 years old. And the other one who was done with them was a 17-year-old. So when we start talking about whoever is inspired by, it's these individuals. And these are the age groups. And sometimes they're younger than that. There's a lot of people. And he gave an interview in 1958 in which there was this young boy who came through and said, you know, I've just found, look, Mr. Evers, these are children. I said, look, Mr. Evers, I got my NAACP registration card. And another young boy, about 10, said, oh, man, I've been had my card. See, these are very young people that he's inspired by. And so when you ask that question, who it is, they run together, 10, 11, 12. He's also inspired by young children who are not necessarily in the movement. Those children who are in the community, who he races with. Even though he's grown, he races up and down the street with young children. So children are a fundamental part of his whole makeup. That's why he's doing what he's doing. And every time he sees them, particularly once they start getting involved, it just inspires him all the more. So that's why I say you have to be mindful that young people are very part of the equation for him.
And the group that we have here, if Blackburn Middle School would please stand, and we would like to thank Mr. Randy Payne. He has been very supportive of the activities we have at the COFO Center and has been coming around ever since our grand opening. So Blackburn Middle School. These are young people who also assisted us with the massive voter registration campaign for the 2012 election. So they were there canvassing in the community. So they are living the legacy of Medgar Evers. But we have a question from a student.
I was trying to say that, why did blacks become slaves instead of white people?
Why did black people become slaves instead of white people? What happened, of course, was this was more of an economic issue in which whites then were kind of going all over the globe. They came to Africa, they traded and took people from Africa to bring them back to work. So in terms of the slave trade that you're talking about, the reason why is because whites came to Africa, saw a group of people that they could manipulate and use for labor purposes, and they brought them back with them. So that's how we ended up over here in this particular position.
Other questions? Okay, yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I would like for you to expound on the role his wife, Merle Evers, played during and after his death.
And that's an important question. It's one we had to deal with too. In terms of her role, she was very, very, very supportive of everything that he did. I want to get that out to the forefront. But she's also an individual who not only supported him, but he saw in her an equal partner in the struggle against inequality. But she was a person who also had her own leadership role too, in her interactions with other young women who were in the movement. She also worked with them in many instances in the NAACP offices. And so she's very, very supportive. But she also understands, and this is the key too, she's not just a person who supports what he does, she's a person who believes what he's doing is necessary. And therefore she's fully vested in that. To give you an idea too in terms of where this leadership comes from, is after he's assassinated, she continues that. And then goes on to have an astounding advocate career herself. And so when you want to know what her role is, it was one of unyielding support. And that's not to say that this was easy. Because you have to keep in mind what it means when you understand that the person who you love, the person who you cherish, the person who is the father of your children, that every time he leaves out the door, there's a strong possibility you will not see him alive again. That weighs on a person. But when you say what's that role, it was one of equal struggle. And she had her position, he had his. And so she fully was supportive of everything he did. That's not to say she always was happy about everything he did. But she understood the necessity of it. One thing in particular, everybody else saw Medgar Evers as the kind of leader of the movement. You know, he's our leader. He's a person who we look to bring these changes. But she always saw him as, this is my husband. And it's hard to separate those two sometimes. You know? And that was one thing that she struggled with, giving her husband over to the movement, you know, full steam. You know, that's a problem as a wife, as a mother, that's very, very difficult. But when you're able to do it, again, that shows the level of trust and the level of understanding and the level of belief she had in his quest to change this state. Right?
Do you think Medgar Evers would have been proud of the way things turned out today?
That's an important question. Yes, I think he would really be pleased at the progress that has been made in terms of African Americans and where they are and what they're doing and the direction in which the country has turned. But I think he'd also at the same time be somewhat concerned that individuals don't really get comfortable with the way things are, and that people keep moving in a direction to challenge the inequalities that still exist, because there's still a lot of problems in America that require attention. And so I think, yes, he would be very much mindful and appreciative and would applaud the change that occurred. But I think he would see those changes as an indication of the possibility of even greater change. For Medgar Evers, he spent a lot of time early on going to places like Chicago, where racism and inequalities wasn't as pronounced as they were in Mississippi at that point. But rather than seeing that trip as an opportunity to move and go someplace else where it wasn't as bad, he saw that opportunity as, wow, okay, if some changes are going on in Chicago, those same changes could happen in Mississippi as well. And he had seen that kind of stuff overseas. And so even today, where I think he would be applauding of some of the positive things that have happened, he wouldn't see that as an opportunity to stop, but rather as an indication that we should push further for even more things. Right? And so I think that's how he would look. And so your question, would he be proud? Yes. Would he be expecting us to do a lot more? Absolutely. And he would leave that in you all's hands.
Dr. Williams.
Yes,
Keith McMillan.
okay, there you go.
Recognizing that there are hundreds of unsung heroes and sheroes throughout the state of Mississippi, what was your influence to actually write a biographical document on Medgar Evers alone?
Okay, and that's interesting for me because I have a long history with Medgar Evers, a very long, going all the way back to when I was about 7, 8. As Dr. Chamberlain mentioned earlier, that we were homeschooled. And so my mother used to always talk about Medgar Evers, you know, always talk about the fact that he hadn't been discussed the way she thought that he should be. No one had really gave him the kind of attention that other civil rights leaders and advocates had gotten. And that always bothered her. She's very vocal too. And that was a problem for her, particularly with everything he had accomplished in the state. And that everything he had accomplished outside of the state to actually change this. And so she would always tell us, you know who Medgar Evers is? Do you know what he's done? Oh, look at this, look at that. And so I grew up with that name in my head. And like I briefly mentioned last night, when I went to graduate school, now this is the weird part. When I went to graduate school, a professor gave us a topic term. We had to write an end of the semester term paper on end of the semester research paper. And he called me into his office because time was getting on. And he asked, you know, have you figured out anything you want to write on? I said, well, no, not yet. Then he said, well, let me ask you this question. Have you ever heard of a guy by the name of Medgar Evers? He asked me that in his office. And I was like, yeah, I have. And it clicked from there. And so in many ways, I look at that as something that was somewhat kismet. You know, I grew up with that name in my subconscious. I get to a program. He calls me in. He asks me, have I heard about this person? You should write your paper on him. And I did. And it went from there to, you know, several other papers, dissertation, and then finally the book. And so that's what drove me to writing it. Now, what really kept me at it was the fact that this was an individual that was so significant and important to the movement for equality, period, that no one's really kind of putting him in that real discussion. Because when people say civil rights leaders, we see Medgar Evers, it's June 12th. It's the assassination. It's not the things that created the environment for that assassination to occur. This was a very busy and effective individual. And so when I'm looking at that story emotionally, I said, wow, not only do I want to tell who this person was as a father, as an activist, as a leader, but I want to situate him in the larger discussion of civil rights activists. Because even though now we think about Evers as, you know, this person was assassinated, other civil rights leaders around the country do not see him in that light. They understand the role he plays. I mean, he's had meetings with Martin Luther King Jr. When he's assassinated, Malcolm X comes out and calls him by name. All right, so, yeah, I mean, he's a very, very important part of the movement. So once I started to understand who he is and looking at that, it became a story that I really wanted to tell. And so, although my mother had that initial spark, and she's proud now, once I got into it, I understood her concerns, and it just kind of kept me going. Yes, sir.
You know, if you were in New York and you mentioned the name Medgar Evers, just about every child and every individual in town will know who he is. So I think the striking difference is between Mississippi when I came back here in '73. I recognized that even though Medgar was right here in Jackson, half the folk around town was not knowledgeable of his life and work. Could not place him in the context of the 1963 movement when actually you got two movements, Birmingham, Alabama, and Jackson, Mississippi, that are the mainstream of the international media. Children in both areas, mainstream of international media. So it became difficult for Medgar in Mississippi to compete with Martin Luther King Jr., the institution. And so oftentimes I think, you know, we have to really remember that he evolved at a point when there was a new national leadership emerging beyond NAACP, when there had been the evolution of a major civil disobedience movement that was capturing the world. And Evers was having to push NAACP out of that niche that it was in that says, you know, we just do test cases and join the civil disobedience movement. So part of the reason why in the South he's not played up is because he has to compete with the image of the institution, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
I agree with you on that too. And he's very, very mindful of that.
Yeah.
And as Dr. John Henry Clark often said, individuals, the real civil rights advocates are oftentimes more known outside of their areas than they are in it. And that happens to Medgar Evers all the time. Going back to King, too, he understands that kind of power and command that King is happening, which is why he's so adamant in trying to get King to come to Mississippi, all right, and speak, so that that national attention comes on Mississippi. He also has a problem, as you're bringing up, this idea of the NAACP being so confined to the legal aspect of it, when everybody else is pushing a more direct action tactics, and that was problematic between him and the NAACP, particularly around 62 and 63.
Oh, right now.
Yes. So, I mean, it was some real contention there. And so I'm totally agree with you, too, that those are the issues that he was faced with. What makes that even more interesting is that even with those kinds of limitations, he's still dedicated toward bringing this whole thing around to where he fully accepts that, and then figuring out how I can manipulate that to my advantage. Now, he plays a little low-key. And he flies under the radar for quite a long time.
Yeah.
He really does. And the Sovereignty Commission, all these other entities don't see him in the same light as Malcolm X and Martin King Jr. threat-wise. It doesn't take him very long toward the end of the fight that they had made a drastic mistake. When he comes out with that television interview, now everybody pretty much knows who he is. That kind of brings a problem of it. And so I agree fully in terms of everything you're saying. These are the issues, and he sees them. And in many instances, he works to bring them to his advantage.
Well, he brought Mississippi to the mainstream of the movement, because the movement that entered Mississippi entered on his stage. So if we talk about SNCC, if we talk about CORE, if we talk about SCLC, Southern Region Council, they're on his base. And it's on his base that we get this new movement in Mississippi that will, of course, mesh with what Medgar is doing. So we have to keep that. But there are three names that are key when you leave the state of Mississippi. And they are Martin, Malcolm, and Medgar. And there's no question about it. He stands equal with Martin and Malcolm.
Exactly, that's my thought. Wholeheartedly, which is the basis of my book too. You know, I really do believe that.
Dr. Williams, we have a question from Ms. Angela Stewart.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
How you doing, Ms. Stewart?
Yes, Dr. Williams. Last year, and I say this because you and Daphne both were Ole Miss products, I had the opportunity to attend some sessions commemorating Meredith's integration and the significant role Medgar Evers played, and because I've even heard James Meredith talk about the significant role he played in helping him at Ole Miss. Can you talk about Medgar Evers and his work with the integration of Ole Miss?
Yes, this is very important. Of course, Evers himself had attempted to integrate the University of Mississippi Law School prior to that. But when James Meredith decides he's going to integrate there, he actually talks with Evers. And they sit down and have a conversation. Evers also at that point takes him to his house so that he can call Thurgood Marshall and talk about it. Now, Mr. Meredith, of course, is a person who's very, very determined at that point. And he really doesn't like people if he's thinking they're kind of challenging his credentials, which is something that he believed Thurgood Marshall was doing at that point. And so there's this big brouhaha between Mr. Meredith and Thurgood Marshall, in which Meredith decides he doesn't need the NAACP. He doesn't want anything to do with it. He'll go at it alone himself. Because he felt that Thurgood was questioning his integrity. Because he's asking him questions about, transcript. He's thinking, who really wants to integrate? Do you understand? So he gets really upset. It's going to be Medgar Evers at that point who intercedes, and through a long process of discussions, actually gets Meredith to go ahead on with the process and work with NAACP. And James Meredith says all credit has to be given to Medgar Evers and his knowledge of human nature for this thing going forward. He's also at these press conferences that James Meredith gives. And so he's providing them with a great deal of advice as well and support. And it's also Evers who's also pushing the NAACP to provide him with the legal assistance that he needs. And so when we talk about what James Meredith is actually able to do, Medgar Evers is behind that curtain in many ways, who's helping that whole process go through. And so when you look at that, when you're asking about his role, it's a very, very significant. And it's one that the NAACP recognizes. It's also one that James Meredith recognizes as well. Oh, yes, sir.
I have a question, and I'd like you to comment on this from the perspective of a historian, and that is this notion of erasure, sins of omission. And when you think about 1963 and history and popular culture of the help, and when you think about the very recent Lincoln, there seems to be a process of Hollywood erasing out significant individuals who are part of history. So you don't see the Lincoln Douglas debate at Lincoln. You don't even hear the mention of Medgar Evers in the integration activities of civil rights movement in the help. You talk about why it is important for students to understand history and not to get caught up in popular trends of popular culture.
Yes, I could definitely talk to that. I mean, that's a very important part of it. We have to understand, particularly young people, that Hollywood is Hollywood, you know. And you cannot look to somebody else, particularly when you're giving them your ticket money, to tell you what your history is. Oftentimes, individuals have no desire whatsoever to tell the complete story. Because the complete story is one that is brutal, it is one that is necessary, and it is one that keeps people on the cuffs of asking the question, if that is what's going on then what I'm seeing now is mighty similar to that. So this notion of erasure, or this idea of whitewashing history per se, has a very definite goal. And that is oftentimes to kind of do away with the kind of awkwardness of social development. As far as students are concerned, that's just why I often tell them all the time, you're going to have to read and be responsible for understanding where you came from and what happened to you and how you dealt with it. Because if you don't understand the full story, you don't know what's happening when it's happening to you again. Now that's something that Medgar Evers often spoke to. This issue of not understanding the full details of the problems you face. Because when you don't understand the full details and you rely on someone else to tell you something, then you're really fully at the mercy of that individual. And you're really hoping that that individual has your best interest at heart. In this day and age, you cannot do that. And we understand this on certain levels. We just don't apply it to those things historically. Because it's a lot of people in here, I could walk up to any one person and say, well, I tell you what, how much money you got in your wallet? You tell me I got about $100. I said, I tell you what, let me have that $100 and I'll bring it back to you in about 15 minutes. I ain't many of you all who say, yeah, here you go. Because you're not going to really trust me to have your best interest at heart. That's the same thing with history. It's going to be our responsibility to look at that, understand what our leaders did, what they had to endure, what problems they faced, and how they got to it. So that we'll be in a better position to understand how we need to tackle the challenges that we face today. If we think that, everything was fine 50 years ago, because Hollywood tells us so, or the popular culture tells us so, then we won't see the need of changing or trying to do anything today when those issues are not there. It's the same problem if you decide to look at African American history, but get it in the cotton fields. That's a major problem, because you're not getting the whole story. So that's how I would approach that. We're going to have to be responsible for understanding where we fit in this historical discussion, the whole discussion, not just the pulled out pieces.
Dr. Williams, we have time for two more questions. One of them being from Ms. Jacqueline Dace, who is the project manager for the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, and also one more student, I think, in this area. Yes, sir. So time for two more questions.
Thank you. Dr. Williams, you mentioned something that I don't want to get lost in your presentation. You said that Medgar Evers pushed the academy, or those in the academy, to practice application over theorization. How is that applied today? Do you see it applied today, and how can it continue to be played out?
Yeah, I do see it as an issue today. It's not enough, and this goes both ways too, for professors and students. It's not enough to just go in the classroom and say, these are the issues. This is what happened. this is the historical discussion. You have to be able to take that and then apply that to the problems that you see in the community. And that happens at a variety of levels. That's a problem today as well. In terms of this ivory tower, or my reach only goes so far as the university's guidelines, or I'm only discussing these things at conferences or among other scholars. No. Individuals are going to get educated, ideally, so that they can bring that back to the community and help uplift the communities from which they come from. It's not enough of that in many instances going on. That's a two-way street, though, because Evers also believed that students, it was their responsibility not only to just go out and get what you know, a college degree, and say, now I've got it, let me get a job and I'll be happy, I'll wait for the gold watch. But rather, you're supposed to take that back to the community and help. If you study in business, you're supposed to be able to take that back into your community and help somebody organize a business. And so that's how I see that. That was a problem that he struggled against then, and it's a problem that still needs addressing today. And so yes, I think that's an issue that needs to be pushed, and I push it every chance I get. So I continue to do that.
And one more question from a top.
Yeah, what was Brother Evers' relationship to the thought of Robert F. Williams, the actions of the Deacons for Defense and Justice, and I guess others and he had just come back, you know, from being in the imperialist army. What was his relationship with the question of whether, like, against the country or just on the local level, the question of armed struggle in the South?
When he first gets back from the military, he is along those lines in terms of armed resistance. He has briefly this idea of maybe there needs to be a Mau Mau type movement in America. That doesn't last very long for him. And he talks about that. He said it didn't take me long of reading the Bible to realize that that was not going to work. Between him and Robert F. Williams, they're very similar in terms of their background, military ideas. But for Evers, he really didn't see armed conflict as a viable strategy, even though he believed in armed self-defense of his family, and himself, of course. But as an overall strategy, that's where he kind of differed with some of the other individuals. He believed in, he understood and respected their ideas and their goals. But that was more of a strategic difference between him overall, from a larger perspective. Now, individually, of course, he was definitely devoted to protecting his family if need be. But as an overall strategy for African Americans as a whole at that point, he didn't necessarily see that as a viable one at that time. I think we had, unfortunately, Ms. Clark had one other thing.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the Hollywood piece, because I think it's very important we understand that Hollywood is big business. And it represents conservative interests, liberal interests, as well as progressive interests. And so when the films come out, we got to be very careful that we understand that those interests are pushed. And the pushing of those interests can be very damaging to us. Django, this recent film that everybody's jumping on, without understanding that Django is very real in many ways. And you can document it. If you go to Troy, New York, where I will be in April, and I invite you to join me, you'll be at the home of black nationalism, where John Brown was actually mentored. Not mentored someone else, he was mentored by Henry Highland Gunn at the father of black nationalism. And the Union Army and nobody else would come near Troy talking about you were collecting some fugitive slaves, unless you planned to be jumped by whites and blacks, and they would chase you for miles. So we have to understand that Hollywood is big business, and that this nation is about what? Business. And those interests are conservative, progressives, and moderates. And at any point, any one of them tries to push their agenda. And right now, we have from the right side, I was looking at an article this morning as I came in, the Supreme Court, again, looking at the Voting Rights Act. And after we don't really need this anymore, let's gut out Section 5. Hollywood will push that if it's with the Tea Party interest. So we have to keep in mind that whether it's the maid, the helper, whatever you want to call it, or whether it's Django, or whether it's Lincoln. We're talking about big business and their moves to control the thinking of the nation.
That's very important too, because when you start looking at Hollywood, that agenda is serious. If you just watch TV, when society starts figuring that they need certain entities, they go to Hollywood. When they start needing more cops, you see a lot of cop shows coming. Firemen, you see a lot of firemen. There's war, you see a lot of war pictures and stuff. I mean, you're absolutely correct in terms of Hollywood is, like people say, Hollywood is really nothing to play with. And TV is nothing to play with. Which is why people are really kind of pushing at young people particularly. Don't subject yourself to that kind of stuff. Because it will get with you and it will have you twisting in the wind and you won't even know what's happening.
And let's give another round of applause for our keynote speaker, Dr. Mark. And you've heard some from one of our panelists, Ms. Collier Clark, who served as a special assistant to Medgar Evers. So we hope that you will join us at 1 o'clock for student paper presentations and at 2:30 to hear Impressions of a Leader featuring Ms. Collier Clark, Mr. Derek Johnson, who is the president of the Mississippi State Conference of the NAACP, and Mr. Albert Sykes, who is with the Young People's Project here in Jackson, Mississippi. But before we leave, I would also like to recognize again two of the Evers family, Miss Rena Evers Everett, the daughter of Medgar Evers, and also the great nephew of Medgar Evers, Mr. Charles Murchison. So if you all will please stand. Now there are other activities going on here on the campus of Jackson State that I would like to make note of. This evening at 6:30 here in the College of Liberal Arts auditorium where you're sitting now, Necessary Tension, an honest conversation on race, art, and identity. So please join us for that this evening. As well as voting as a constitutional right in the 21st century. This is the Medgar Evers Ella Baker Lecture Series that will be tomorrow evening at the H.T. Sampson Library Java Cafe at 6 o'clock. And please join us for that. And as well, you all saw Johann Smiles, for the few of y'all who were here. He is the director of Black History Month play, Black Fossil, exploring the journey of the African American experience. So please feel free to come down and join meet and greet and also ask for autographs from our guest speaker. And I would like to announce that ironically the winner of the book package that you see on the table there is Mr. Randy Payne, and along with the students of Blackburn Middle School. So let's give those students another chance to be here this afternoon. But thank you all for coming out, and we hope you will join us again at 1 o'clock for the Young Student Scholars presentations.